There we go. All right. Well, barring more technical difficulties, we're here for office hours um, for Chef Supermarket. So come join us if you have any questions.
Christopher.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey man.
I realized a
Um,
second ago, I was like, oh, I should have put the link to the thing in the chat room.
yeah, I was gonna give you a hard time about that, but then I was like, I am an adult. I can probably find it. I know how the internet works. Um, yeah, so I don't know. So it's interesting because so the problem, right, is that we've switched to GitHub to satisfy people, um, but at the same time, like the Jira workflow stuff exists because it's like super helpful.
Hmm.
And
Well, it's helpful depending on who you are, right? Like, if you are a brand new contributor to a cookbook, it ends up getting in your way 90% of the time because you're like, what do you mean I have to do all these extra things?
right, I
But if
mean,
you're
it's
dealing
super
with like,
helpful. Yeah, to the people that have to deal with it. I just had a weird echo and realized I had the YouTube video playing in the background. That was neat. Um, I had our conversation on time delay. Yeah. Anyway, so like the workflow stuff was like super useful to me, and anyone who wasn't me like didn't realize how necessary it was. And so getting rid of it makes a lot more people happy than me. So that's definitely the right direction. But so I think you probably caught. So like the issue is that like we currently have 43 open PRs in Chef,
hmm.
um, which from past experience with code review in like having tickets ready for review, that's a lot. Um,
Yeah.
so basically means like you know we can look at the top. Um, so search for those and sort by like um, I used to go by least recently updated to get the ones that fell through the cracks, but even like most recently updated. But the problem with that,
Hmm.
if you think about it in the long term, is like you just keep looking at the like four super active ones, and the people that aren't super active fall down in the queue. And so in similar situations in the past, we had to like then alternate to least recently updated, at different code review meetings. And so that workflow stuff like really is important unless like your number of contributions is so low you can just like stay on top of them. But that's not the case for Chef.
Exactly.
So how to implement a workflow step for ready for review. I like Lamont's idea of doing it the opposite way, where we have all pull requests are ready for review unless we've marked them like not ready for review. Um,
Hmm.
because over time, like you know, it's the new people that we really want to make sure we get to, more than the people who've gone on vacation for 6 months. But yeah, we would need some way to like automate. Well, yeah. So we don't need a way to automate adding the tag. We can just do that, right? Adding the label
Hmm.
that says it's inactive. But then how do we know when it's not inactive anymore? We get an email,
Well, and
but
so, well, that's fairly easy because you can subscribe to webhooks on. Well, let me go double check. Let me pull up GitHub. Because in concept, you could just anytime that a a comment or an action is taken on a pull request, it could hit an endpoint, and that endpoint could make a decision as to whether or not it should like add the tag back or that type of thing.
yeah, I mean,
So
mostly the other way around, right?
webhooks.
If there's a comment on an issue on a PR and the PR is tagged inactive, we would have it remove that label.
Ooh, give me 1 second. I'm glad I actually went and did this because I broke. Well, we broke this morning. Um, some of the already existing webhooks. There we go. Oh, cool. So do. So yeah, in concept, you could just um, what is it called? In concept, you could just get events from a webhook and use that as your way of making a decision about things. So um, during your first review step, because it sounds like your workflow would be you end up in a situation where it's like I have a new issue comes in, it automatically gets a tag that says, well, we do CLA verification, we do, and then it automatically gets a tag that says needs review. During your first review step, you guys uncheck that and say, no, this is not ready yet. We'll review it the next go round. And then anytime an taken upon that, whether it be there are additional commits made to it or there are comments added to it, the review tag gets added back. And you may just want it just when it's when there are changes to the code versus comments. And that's actually what Curry does right now is when it subscribes to an event, every time an event happens, or every time a synchronization event, let me get the list because I was just looking at them. But every time a pull request is opened, closed, or synchronized, it goes through and checks contributors. So in this case, you could do something fairly similar where anytime one of those three events happens, Curry could then, in addition to checking for the CLA, it could make either just blindly or make a decision as to whether or not to reapply the needs review tag. And maybe you decide to apply only apply the needs review tag upon it once something is set with the CLA being verified. Does that make sense at all? I think.
Yeah, except I think we're looking. We were, at least in the channel, we were just talking about inverting that, which is like everything's waiting for review unless it's tagged something. We were saying inactive, but like
as inactive.
Right. And then we just need Curry to remove the inactive label when something happens on that PR, which could be like this commit or this pull request event or like an issue comment event.
Exactly. And I would probably lean towards the way Curry does it now, because what Curry does is it sees one of those three events, an open, a close, or a synchronization event, really an open or a synchronization event, and it goes and I think the actual method is annotate, but it rechecks the CLA and applies the tag, the tag. And I actually
right, because someone might.
Should...
Yeah. All right. Maybe that makes sense.
So that's kind of an interesting bug, and bug isn't really the word, but interesting problem with Supermarket that or with Curry that I hadn't thought about. That it doesn't. That if you change the website like I did, or like Josh and I did earlier, it breaks the webhook because it was pointed at HTTP and now it's pointed at HTTPS. I guess it's not an issue because going forward that won't happen per se, but it is an issue.
Oh, when Joshua did that deployment this morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, your URL's changed.
Yep. So now I need to go through and fix all of the web, which luckily there are only a few of them. But does that sound fairly reasonable as a solution? Just, on one of those events?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right way to go, is on one of those events, we unlabel. I think we need to stop and think if inactive is the right word. But I just need to circle around with the client team because technically it's not me. And
Yeah.
so I don't want to speak for them. But yeah, but I think as the person who has experience with this workflow stuff, that sounds like the reasonable direction to me.
Okay. Yeah, and that shouldn't be super hard. I've looked through I understand the code base. Not to say that I could extend it easily, but I've read through the code base and it's not particularly crazy. So it should be fairly easy to make that extension.
Yeah, I mean, I think we already, like, the reason I'm talking about doing it with Curry too is that we have the benefit. You already have an infrastructure for making sure that Curry's running and, someone gets paged if it's doesn't and whatnot, right?
Well, exactly. In the sense that we're checking to make sure that Sidekick is running. Um, what we don't have yet, like we don't have fine grain checks, but we have basically good enough checks at this point where it is checking regularly to see that the Rails app is running. I do not have a full integration test that runs regularly pushing a webhook in to see if it worked.
Right. And we can always add
That
that after the first postmortem.
well, exactly, or like this is like the killer of web operations, right? Like what we all really want to do is have something that exercises the entire freaking API every single time we run a test. Or no, I'm sorry, that's what we get alerted on. The problem is anybody in a web operations shop that's shipping product that's able to get to that point. I mean, they get it for some of the APIs, but they don't get it for everything.
Right.
So I don't know. Like, when was the last time you actually knew someone
It's
that
worth noting
ran
Probably
mail
secret sauce.
we
Say that again,
wrote
Brett?
like an entire test suite that tests the API to make sure it's the same as the current, like the previous site. So you could automate that and have it like hit production and verify like the API returns what it should. So like we have something that kind of does that.
Well, and
Right, I
that
mean-
that actually, we could write a Sensu check. That would be kind of cool.
You would need to have, like, you could
Go
open
ahead,
up an
Brian.
issue somewhere with Curry, like a PR that, it periodically, like, goes out and pokes and then make sure that it gets the poke, right?
Yep, so we have that. So we created one that's under like our company's GitHub repo. It's like a joke repo. And so there's just a bunch of dumb pull requests with like really bad emojis in it. And it just like opens and closes it and then like makes sure that it's working. Because like testing
Right.
that was really difficult. So yeah, we had to do that. But I mean, like we definitely could test, like we could make sure that stuff's working as it should.
Right.
Automate it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
So, Jessica,
it's not a bad idea, but
I
yeah.
think you're Jessica. Let me go see the thing. Yes, you are Jessica.
Yes.
So, you asked in a back channel, and I'm going to ask it here because it's useful for this particular session. What is Curry? What is this thing we keep talking about? So Curry is, I don't actually know where the name came from. I wish I had the history on that.
I do have the history because I'm the person who named it, and I'm half of the two people who wrote the code for it. So,
Nice.
okay, so basically what happened was, like, all good features in software is there was like a bullet point list on the full things that had to get done, and this one specific bullet point was like a gigantic piece of application functionality because like it relies so heavily on GitHub's API.
Mhm.
And it seems so unrelated to like supermarkets focus on cookbooks. So the initial thought was, okay, well we'll kind of go in like a microservices route, and Curry will be its own application with its sole purpose of checking that people have signed CLAs who have opened the pull request on GitHub. So me being like really clever I was like, oh, like, we'll call it curry, like a food that you buy at the supermarket. And so like I just started to like write this own application and like try to do everything in like 10 minutes, which happens a lot, and then ended up realizing that that was like a very bad decision. And then it got roped into the application, and everything within it is namespaced curry as like the functionality pertaining to like checking the CLA signage status of contributors on GitHub. That's kind of what it is.
It makes it a very Googleable name.
Just like
Right.
chef and
Chef curry.
yeah.
Yep, doesn't bring up anything else.
I don't think the language, like I don't think the name curry is used anything with anywhere within the application. So I'm surprised it's lived this far.
It actually is. You know where the only place you see the name curry mentioned is in the text of the comment you get.
Oh yeah. Oh man,
It says, "Hello, I'm your friendly curry bot."
we
something
could
like
definitely
that.
change that. That was like a joke. All the text was like just me being like silly. So we can change that if we want, but
I don't know. We went live with it, man. I kind of like it.
well, we just better hope that we stay on GitHub forever and ever because that stuff is so tightly tied to it.
Well, exactly. And what's going to be interesting to see is how we deal with this type of stuff going forward. I think what's going to happen is, like, if we were to move to say GitLab, or insert random thing that's not GitHub and not GitLab and not um, what's the Atlassian product, Bitbucket. It's Foo Bucket, and it's the new hotness, and we're all using this new version control system that no one's ever heard of yet because it doesn't exist yet. Um,
Yeah, call it like pod or something, and we'll write it ourselves.
I think what ends up happening is you end up in a place where what's the word I'm looking for here? You end up in a place where we now have actual accounts tied to things and people, so we can send a blast message out. We can do things that we haven't been able to do in the past, where it's like when they log into the community site, they can get that message, or when they get that message on whatever this new system is that we've moved to, we have an actual account that can be continue to be linked to, that we just didn't have before, which is huge. But to answer the bigger question, curry is it's the CLA checker today. My guess is, just based on the conversations we're having now and knowing where things are where the state of the world is right now, that we will see it used for even more, because it's an easy place to do those things. I mean, as Brian put it, we've already got the infrastructure in place to kind of start this process. This becomes an easy way to do it, and there just even the little bit of infrastructure that exists around GitHub, like the correct account in place and whatnot, is huge. So
Makes sense.
long spiel.
Thanks.
So sometime between now and when you do the internal curry demo this afternoon, are you gonna write this code for me?
No. I am excited to tell you that there are some really awesome changes coming to that code. Like, one of the things that we've got on the roadmap is we're going to have it automatically when you add a repo to the list. It's going to automatically go and the problem with reading the code base is now you use the terms that the code base uses, but it's going to go annotate all of those existing PRs. So today, one of the problems we do have is that it only deals with the pull requests on creation or when the code changes. So all of the pull requests that exist today wouldn't get annotated. we're going to add it so that when you add the actual repo to Curry, that it goes and checks every pull request for CLA validity.
Cool. Hopefully it's got a queue.
It's got a yeah. No, it's gonna. What that's gonna do is drop it into a Sidekick worker. I think is the plan.
Cool. So I will talk to the client people about my proposal, and then we will figure out how we get it into your stuff. And I will attend your announcement about your stuff later today as well. Thank you, Sir Leader of Stuff.
Oh, no, you didn't interrupt at all. This is kind of what I'm here for right now. It's just kind of office hours to answer questions.
Are you going to get lonely when I leave?
Probably. That's kind of the world.
Well, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Chris. See you,
No
Jessica.
problem.
Bye.
actually have it. And all right, I think I'm going to call it at that. Thank you to those that joined a little earlier for office hours. Hopefully, we'll see people soon.